This is Two Guys, One Book, and we're back here several weeks later, a multitude of weeks later, perhaps even dozens of weeks later since going over Chapter 7, and today we're covering Chapter 8 of Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. And Chapter 8 is the last 500 years in a nutshell. And so this episode is going to be an Izzy episode because Ismail is our history connoisseur, some might say. On a spectrum from 0 to 10 of thinking about the Roman Empire, 0 being none, 10 being thinks about it all the time, Izzy is definitely a 9.9. 99% of his thoughts are about the Roman Empire and the last 500 years in a nutshell. So, Ismail, how are you doing?
I'm feeling pretty autistic right now, I'll be honest. But we try our best. Yeah, I mean history is great. I would say my thoughts really kind of more I would say World War II definitely occupies like 70% of my brain. Um so yeah, let's get it going. I guess I'm interested to see well, I guess the just for a background, the purpose of this episode for the most part is saying like, okay, where have we gone from 1500 up until the modern day? What are the major milestones that have taken place? And the main things that we're going to be diving into are what happened, what resulted from those actions in terms of the new, like a new world order of sorts, and what parallels can we draw from then, that time period, to now? Whether that's a similarity, whether that's a difference, whether that's a sharing of global authority, influence, power, what have you. We're going to be kind of diving into that periodically by points, and hopefully we all learn something a little bit new on the way.
I know I'm going to learn a lot of new stuff, especially about the last 500 years of history, because that's what we're talking about. Uh, and,
Yeah.
and so Chapter 8 starts on page 243. And yeah, like Ismail said, the Ray Dalio's reason for writing this was to illustrate how the world has changed and how quickly it can change, and kind of give like a big picture overview of how the big cycle kind of operates, so we can dive deeper later in the book on the Dutch, British, American, and Chinese cases. So, Izzy, you want to kick us off with the world in 1500?
Yeah. So let's take a look. I think we should go and take and go high level, kind of as Ray did, um, in terms of where our from starting from 1500. What were we talking? What were the main powers here? We'll go kind of continental, not including Australia or Antarctica, obviously.
Antarctica is my favorite empire.
The Penguin Empire. No, but okay. So in Europe, we're talking really Holy Roman Empire, or what remained of it, at least. England, France, Russia, and the Ottomans. Those are probably the only ones worth mentioning.
And so the Ottomans also went into the Middle East, which
Yes.
is kind of its own continent, right?
Yeah. So the Ottomans, I mean, specifically as we kind of talk about Europe, they kind of had that Balkan region, and the and Greece and kind of that side of things in Anatolia. So they think he mentioned they took over Constantinople in 1453. So at that point, they were kind of 50 years established into that region. So they were pretty, They weren't real. I don't think that they ever spread beyond. If you see the map on page 247, I don't think they ever really spread beyond that, at least within Europe. But yeah, I mean that was a pretty strong point for them, and they had a lot of influence in that region. But so that would be kind of Europe and the Middle East, I guess. And keep in mind the Ottomans also controlled all of the area around, like modern day, we're talking about Jordan, Syria, Israel, Palestine, talking about like all these different areas. They had full control over that, as well as I'm pretty sure Egypt as well, at the very least when it comes to North Africa. So that was that. And then
And so between the Ottomans and the rest of the European powers,
mhm.
like these were all pretty much little regional little guys, and most of them were like families with who just had land and power and wealth in various forms, right? I mean, it was kind of like that for the regional powers, and then I guess giant empires, which were also kind of like kings and stuff, right?
Yeah, so we want to kind of look at it, the breakdown almost like this was Europe right out of the Dark Ages. So up until that point, Europe was controlled. It was a feudal, like it was all feudal in terms of how they operated things. So you had kings, you had lords, you had, dukes, all of these breakdowns, landowning class, and then you had serfs and vassals and people who are not landowning class. So we have to kind of look at it with that lens, because obviously we do have like the Holy Roman Empire, or at least what remained of it, and things like that. But ultimately, it was a very big paradigm shift as Europe was exiting the Dark Ages. That now, entering the Renaissance and things where they were currently transitioning out of that old system into one that was a little bit more dynamic, and eventually into that capitalism kind of mentality where kind of anybody can achieve wealth, sort of thing, if you work for it. But at this present moment, 1500, yeah, it was still very families, lords. It was broken down. It was still very feudal. It was, even the Holy Roman Empire was not necessarily a very united empire. It was just, if you were wealthy, then you had influence, and if you weren't, they didn't. You know, um, and this was like also concluding. This was after the bunch of the Crusades went down, and like it was a point where I think the influence specifically of the church, I think of the Catholic Church and the Pope, was at a low, coming out of those highs of the Crusades, and then you have kind of Martin Luther, and that whole thing kind of dropped his influence a little bit, and he just didn't have that. Up until that point, he was kind of the uniting force across Europe. If nothing else, it was the Pope. But at this point, it was even his influence was kind of waning. He didn't really have that say anymore, and in terms of at least military authority and stuff like that, he didn't have anything like that.
Okay. And so I think it makes sense to say that, like, compared to the feudal little territories in Europe or in the rest of Europe, like the Ottoman Empire had a much bigger military and much bigger like economic influence, like means of producing goods and just like, I don't know, I guess different services at that time, and as well as just like military strength that allowed them to go and, like, I don't know, just like go take whatever they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, it was you have to think. I mean, it was apples to oranges because it was like a united force. Like when you think about it, also the Middle East during Europe's Dark Ages was kind of at their golden age. Like it was the golden age in the Middle East when the Europe was really struggling. So at the end of the day, it was just apples to oranges. The Ottomans were a united force. They were Turks, and they were already had major military campaign success like in the Middle East. So they were like, you know what, like we're gonna go and retake this, Anatolia region that had been kind of shifting hands from Seljuk Turks and stuff like that, and they took it. But it wasn't that the Ottomans themselves were super innovative. They just through conquest and also through adopting of religion and through kind of taking some of the science and things that the Middle East had developed up until that point. They basically, what happened was they took a waning Islamic empire, quote unquote, in the Middle East and North Africa that was towards its tail end, but they still had a lot of science and a lot of research and knowledge there. And they basically took over this land, basically consuming all of that knowledge that would have otherwise just gone to waste because that empire was crumbling. So that's all that happened. So then they learned all this stuff and they adopted the religion. Then they said, okay, now we're like twice as strong because not only do we have the military prowess of being very good, like a very good army, but also we have now all of this research and science and medicine and all this technology, right? So that's why they were so successful at that point. They lasted, I mean, ultimately, like that was around their peak, but they lasted for a really long, until World War One, really. So that was 1500s to World War One. That's a long time for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I just asked that question to get a perspective on the world order at the time.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that makes sense from the European and Middle Eastern standpoints. Do you have any particular thoughts on Asia?
Well, I'll tell you right now, Japan was not. They were still a civil war feudal state as well. So, yeah, surprise guest here, the cat. So yeah, Japan was still kind of fighting amongst themselves. They didn't have any sort of unity. They wouldn't for a long time after. Really, China was the main power, I would say, in the region. I mean, even India was at this point. I'm pretty sure this was where India was going to be soon occupied slash conquered by I think it was the Mughal Empire, the Mughals, which was I believe, because I had read on this that pretty much it was a sultanate in northern India, and then in the south it was a Hindu empire. But pretty much the Mughals were a stronger kind of sultanate Muslim empire that came in and just kind of took over. And they're the ones who built the Taj Mahal and that sort of thing. It was that empire. But in China, it says here the Ming Dynasty, page 248, the largest navy in the world, and allegedly a standing army of 1 million troops. It's a big army.
It's a lot of troops, especially at this time.
That's a massive army. That is that means there's like nobody's messing with China. Not a single person. Confucian ideals, Neo-Confucianism, it says, which was dominant at the time, shifted the focus of the belief system towards a rational, philosophical, academic, and humanistic form. Sorry, guys. The cat just did a weird jump. That was interesting.
Yeah, so just for reference, the population of the world in 1500 was 461 million. So 1 million troops at 461 million. That's quite a bit of firepower.
I mean, but Ming China, it says, had 160 million people. So that's like a quarter of the world, right?
Yeah, big time.
Like that's a lot of people. So, I mean, and that's one thing that I think when we're talking about, consistencies and similar, like China has always been. There's always been, and it's amazing that this was the 1500s. We're talking about Europe just now coming out of the Dark Ages, and we have a empire in China that is not even the full size of what China is now today. It's like half of it. We're only taking like the eastern half, and they had a quarter of the world's population. They were able to sustain that, also with the largest army and some of the highest literacy rates in the world, some of the highest levels of technology and sophistication. Like it's really impressive. It's impressive.
Dude, guess how big, like, so 1 million out of 461 million. That's a small percentage, but guess how big the army would be today if China still had a, army that, had that percentage of the world's population. Like how big would it be? How many people? Don't do the calculation because I already did the calculation. Just
Okay, let me think.
how many do you
So
think?
1,000,000 to 160. So
460. 1,000,000 out of 460 million people in the world.
oh, you're talking about. I thought you were talking about the percentage of their military to their population, but you're talking about the world population. Oh, I mean that would be like probably now we're at 7 billion. Probably be like 500 million people. How big would it be?
Not quite,
What
but
is that too much?
17.3 million people.
Oh golly, that was a horrible estimate, dude. That was some. That's still insane though. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people.
Like imagine 17.4 million people coming from Russia into Ukraine. I don't even think they would fit in Ukraine.
No, well, at least not through the border.
Yeah,
Take them like a year to get through.
that would be a lot of people. Like how
Yeah.
many trains would that be?
Yeah, a lot, a lot. That's insane. That's a, yeah. But I mean, it also speaks to again like how different the East was compared to the West, and how it kind of always has been. While they were enjoying all of these things and the printing press that had been around, and their architecture and their reading and their learning and their gunpowder and all this stuff, Europe literally didn't even know how to print things until very recently.
Europe needs to get good, is what it sounds like.
Well, it's just funny because we've understood and we have this thought that Europe has always been dominant, but it never, like, when we look at consistencies over history, if you were to say one region that has been the benchmark for progress and for innovation and for technology, there is no other answer except for China. There's literally no other answer.
So basically, when Ray Dalio makes the argument that China is on the rise, it shouldn't be that surprising because they've kind of always been. And like, obviously, past performance isn't a guarantee for future performance. You can't predict with the future with the past necessarily, at least with 100% accuracy. You're never going to be able to do that. But it's like if you look at the past, you can generally get a good idea of what the future is in most cases. And so with China being on top, I mean, even in the 1500s, like, I mean, only rivaled by the Ottoman Empire, but that still isn't Europe, you know?
Yeah, and even then, I mean, we're talking about apples to oranges. The Ottomans were not. I mean, yeah, again, like two different things: land-based empire versus a naval superpower that was the hallmark of human innovation. Like two different things for sure. I would say one very critical difference though would be religion between the two, because and same thing with kind of Europe and China. Like China had never since its creation. I mean, obviously you have Confucianism and Taoism and these sorts of things, but there was never, and some people credit that as to why they progressed so quickly, is because like there's a very sort of callous perspective towards others in a lot of ways. It's a lot like, there's a social hierarchy of who deserves, like, it's like, I think it's like country or, something like that. And Tao and Confucianism, I forget what the structure is, but it's like family, country, whatever, or family, community, country, and then like self is like on the bottom or something like that, which is very interesting because it's like, yeah, they never had that influence of religion in their kind of development. So they never had a situation like, for example, in Europe, like with the Pope and how much influence they had. Like they never had a situation like that, you know?
Yeah, the only thing I see in here is that the empire or the emperor had the mandate of heaven.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I mean, the emperor is pretty much like, I mean, I'm not sure how it was in China, but I know, I mean, at least in Japan, like it was like a God living, pretty much is what it is. But I was going to ask you, when do you think the first Chinese dynasty was?
When do I think the first Chinese dynasty was? Let's go.
This isn't like first earliest record of history in China. This is legit dynasty, like organized government.
Let's go 500 BC.
Try 2070 BC.
Yeah, I was pretty far off.
They've been around for a long time, is my point. So like when we talk about standing the test of time, like I would say pretty confidently that China has, if I mean 2070 BC to today, pretty much like, and it's still China, and they still speak Chinese, and they still hold. It's impressive that even like from a cultural perspective, that they hold these cultures and they have like a sense of, like pride in terms of their history. Like it's China, like they have never lost that identity as Chinese. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty. Yeah, like I mean, you don't have any other region in the world that has a similar thing, except for China.
Yeah, that's literally by 1500 they had been around for 3500 years. That's quite a long time. And you think about, like all these people that say today, oh, America can never fall. Like, dude, we've been around for like 250 years. That's a joke compared to how long China's been around.
Yeah, in China, it's fallen. Well, it says from not from 907 till 960, the Chinese Empire broke apart more than 5 times into the 5 dynasties period and 10 kingdoms from 907 till 960. That was at that period. So each dynasty rose and fell like clockwork. Like it was never like China wasn't just one piece until now. Like they've probably collapsed like dozens of times. Been conquered a couple times. Like like it's not like it was like all sunshine and rainbows. But ultimately, like I think the important thing to note is just the fact that like they've always maintained a level of influence, no matter what. Even after they've been conquered by the Mongols and the Mongols left, it's like who lasted, the Mongols or the Chinese? The Chinese did. The Mongols did not last, which is funny because the Mongols literally controlled like half the world. And they didn't, there's virtually no like tangible, like, oh, we could tell that the Mongols left something lasting here, except for like, what's his name? Genghis Khan's like how like 70% of the world is related to him or something like that. It's unbelievable. Guy was active. That's the only thing that he left for the world was his kids, I guess.
That's a serious legacy right there. Yeah, to me, the Mongols seem like they just went around and kind of destroyed everyone. That was kind of their bit, and it was a very constructive bit. So the fact they didn't leave anything behind isn't necessarily surprising because, yeah, their concern was just run around and, pillage and, spread the gene pool
Well,
around.
they literally said like, hey, like if you're not gonna surrender, if you surrender, we're still gonna like kill a bunch of y'all because like, why are you surrendering? But like, if you don't surrender, like we're gonna kill all of you. So it's like you make the decision. Well, not all of you, just the men. So it's like, it's one of those things where they were just savage people until they turned to religion, and then even then they were still savage. They just did it in the name of religion instead of like for being crazy people. So it's just, it's interesting. But to get back to it, I mean, the point is, it says here on page 249, ironically and typically, the enormity of the Ming dynasty's wealth and power is one possible explanation of what eventually led to its fall. Believing that they did not need anything else, the emperors put an end to China's exploration of the world, closed its doors, and retired to lives of pleasure and turned over the running of government to their ministers and eunuchs, which led to dysfunctional infighting, corruption, weakness, and vulnerability to attack. This was a shift away from pragmatic scientific study and innovation towards pedantic scholarship. So I think we can see a little bit of a similarity there to kind of where the West has kind of become recently. And I'm not saying that to say that like it's right that the West was, especially in their periods of like kind of colonial and imperialism, like that. Definitely not saying that's right, but at the end of the day, like what spurred the period of exploration, it was the Renaissance and learning, and we want to explore and see new things and all, this kind of fervent passion to go beyond what they knew. And now it's a point where it's like Europe specifically, and also the US too, but Europe specifically is like so content with just kind of like leaving things where they are and just staying hands off and having like a super corrupt internal system. Like they're satisfied with that.
Yeah, it seems like we've just accepted what we know, but like we aren't concerned with trying to find truth anymore, trying to learn things anymore. We are seemingly so arrogant that we are just like entirely self-obsessed in everything that we do, and we just want to have a bunch of pleasure in a lot of cases. I'm not saying everyone's like this, but that is what's at least emphasized on social media. Like if you're going to go on social media and try and have a following, it seems like, yeah, you best not be teaching people the truth. You should probably be teaching people how to, I don't know, enjoy their lives better, how to get more money for themselves so they can buy more things and be more comfortable. I don't know.
No, I mean that's true. I mean, but ultimately, I think that there's there's a pro and con to each, because obviously what we have now we're very fortunate to have, because um we have freedom to make decisions and pursue whatever we want to pursue, which back during the early Renaissance was not necessarily the case. Like you don't have that freedom of mobility between what you want to do. It's like your dad was a freaking stonemason, you're going to be a stonemason. Your dad was a cobbler, you're going to be a cobbler. Like you don't have a choice. Which obviously means that risk to be able to explore and do things different is that much bigger of a risk. You're making that risk, but at the end of the day, it's like, do we need to go back to that? Not necessarily. I just think that there needs to be sort of a return to risk takers are risk takers, and you should be reward. And when they get rewarded, they should get a big reward because they took a huge risk. Versus now, it's like you get rewarded for like not doing anything. You get rewarded for doing like non-risks.
I think we should have a new name for our generation, because we're not the millennials, right? We're after the millennials. I think we should be the participation trophy generation. How does that sound?
Or crybaby generation.
The sissy generation.
Sissy.
Yeah, I was side tangent. I was in church last week, and we were talking about the Ligbata issue and stuff like that. Talking about how gender identity is on a spectrum and stuff, which it is. It's a psychological thing, and some people are more masculine and some people are more feminine. And today people call that a different thing than they did back then. And back then they called, men who acted like or had characteristics of females or typical females, they called them sissies.
Pretty much. I mean, and when it says what it means when it says eunuchs, right?
No balls.
Yeah, exactly. And it was weird because I'm not sure exactly why, and I'm kind of speaking out of my ass here, but like I'm pretty positive that they put eunuchs in positions of power because A, you had a sort of level of control over them because you literally took away their balls. And B, because I think there was an idea, at least in some regions, in some parts of the world, that they wouldn't be influenced by like sex or power or things like that because they literally didn't have testicles.
Yeah, they didn't really have much testosterone running through them.
Well, I mean, like they're not like you can't really corrupt them like that with like I mean maybe you can give them money, but like when you're a guy in a position of power, like what does money buy you? You know, like you want like you want women. Like if you have power, like you're gonna want women. That's just like part of what being a at least in this time period. Like yeah, you give a guy enough power, what do you think he's gonna have right by him? Like for sure. So it's like I just find it interesting because it's like the fact that they thought that, and also the fact that you know that was normal. I guess like that was like a normal thing. You know, it's just kind of odd to me. It's like that would not be the case now. But I wouldn't be surprised if like half of the freaking House of Reps didn't have testicles, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's really making a comeback. But instead of like forced to cut off your balls, people are doing it voluntarily a lot more. And that kind of brings me to one of the bold sentences that Ray Dalio has here. It says, it's on page 251. When reading this short summary of the last 500 years, notice both the evolutions and the cycles. You will see that there were both several revolutions in ways of thinking that led to tremendous evolution and progress over 100 years. So we could also see this as several devolutions in ways of thinking, going back to, old ways of thinking potentially, leading to tremendous devolution and, whatever the opposite of progress is over hundreds of years. But this obviously doesn't have to mean the whole world is doing this, right? Like today, I don't know, it's only the West that's really like obsessed with, I don't know, becoming eunuchs for some reason, and kind of not really obsessed with learning. And I don't know.
Well, I think it's just a matter of like, you know, I'm sure if you were looking, I'm sure you can find somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Africa a guy that acts feminine that may be thinking that he's a woman, but I would find that very rare, like very rare. You know, that would be like one per like I don't even know how many people. You know, you would be really hard pressed to find people like that in Africa or even like rural parts of South America or anything. Like, you would not find that. But like I think what it is, again, like when we say first world problems and stuff like that, I think that's what it is. It's like there's a hierarchy of needs, I think, and ultimately when your base needs are covered, your food is covered, your water is covered, your shelter is covered, what's next? I mean, now you're at sex. You know, okay, that's covered, but now you have, you know, everything else. You're good on money, you're good on all these things. So now, like you try to find things that are not met. You know, ultimately is what it is. But um, anyway, I kind of wanted to shift it back to we didn't talk about two regions here, and that's Africa and America, the Americas. Real quick, I just want to say Africa. Um, Not really much going on right now. It was the Songhai. I'm pretty sure they were the people who were the not predecessors, but whatever the other term is, successors to the Mali Empire. I'm pretty positive in West Africa. The Mali Empire was led by Mansa Musa, who was the most wealthy man I think ever in history. He was the most wealthy man ever, and he had so much money that he brought an entire caravan. Because you know how Muslim people do pilgrimage to to Mecca, and he went from modern day like Timbuktu, and he brought a caravan of like this was like hundreds and hundreds of people, and he went all the way across the Sahara Desert, across North Africa, like through Ethiopia into, or I'm sorry, through he must have gone through Egypt, I guess, because Egypt, and then through into Saudi Arabia through there, all like with a massive caravan, and he was loaded up with gold. He had a shit ton of money that he was bringing with him, and he brought like literally entertainers. He brought freaking musicians. He literally brought everybody. He brought the entire, like, it's like taking an entire city and being like, all right, come on, we're going mobile.
And I bet he like even could have made money on that trip. You know, if he went to the right places, like visited cities. Oh,
Well, you're
yeah, just
selling
go
stuff. It's a caravan.
entertain these people, sell this stuff. Yeah.
Well,
I
it's a
mean,
caravan. I mean, that's what they used to do back then, in like in North Africa and the Middle East. Like, these caravans would be, you have things with you. What are those things for? You're gonna have to make stops. You're gonna have to, water the camels. You're gonna have to do all these things. So what are you gonna do? Hey, like, I got these things. You want to buy them? We could trade this real quick. He's making money for sure. And I want to see like what he made in like modern day terms. But
Mansa Musa.
Ansa Musa. Okay, he was U.S. celebrity estimated his net worth, his wealth at 400 billion estimation.
That's some cash.
But economic historians agree that his wealth is impossible to pin down to a number. Yeah, he was the richest man ever in history, which is insane. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just he had gold, he had salt, which was very valuable. Like all sorts of spices were a very good thing to be trading at that time because not everyone had spices. You had to move them around. You're moving spices that are native to Asia into Africa. They're going to cost a lot of money because you can't grow them in Africa. You know what I mean? So it's like it was just a different time. But either way, my point is that the Songhai Empire succeeded that empire and was also very wealthy, but this was like the time approaching when the slave trade was about to start. And once this empire collapsed, it was like there was a power vacuum and it kind of went back to a very tribal area, at least in West Africa, which kind of opened the doors to allowing for them to be exploited with the slave trade because they didn't have that centralized they didn't have a kingdom anymore. It wasn't a kingdom. It was just kind of lawless.
Yeah, there wasn't much organization, if anything at all. So, what about the Americas? You got the Indians, right?
Yep, the Aztecs. Yep, North America, very fragmented, different tribes. It always was like that, though. The only really united large empires of tribes was always like Mexico and South America. Always, North America never had a American Indian tribe that was like big ever. I mean, you had like Cherokee, which was like big regional, but they were never like the Aztecs who like controlled all of this, swath of land, like nothing like that. But the Aztecs were very big at the time. I'm pretty sure the Incas were too in South America. But the Aztecs were like, they had a lot of money for sure, a lot of gold, and yeah, and the Spanish were about to see that firsthand when they go down there and go fuck their shit up.
Yeah, I gotta say it's really interesting. Just kind of tangential. Like at this time, like we gotta remember one of the things that Ray Dalio brought up was the world was much bigger at this point. Meaning they didn't have like the communication worldwide that we have. Like I can go talk to anyone I want essentially around the whole world, except for maybe people in North Korea. Um, and you can get on a plane and travel across the Pacific Ocean. But back then, it's not like these civilizations were communicating, like especially between the Americas and the rest of the world, they were not communicating at all. But it's interesting that they all came to the common conclusion that gold is valuable. They were just like digging it up out of the ground, even though it just like looked kind of shiny, I guess, and was kind of rare. And they were just like, yep, this has value.
I think it depends on where we're talking about too, because ultimately gold is only value. Gold is like, at least when you look at the progression of an empire or a civilization, like gold only becomes valuable when the infrastructure is there. When there's no infrastructure, no one cares about gold at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like it's like one of those things where, kind of going back to what I said earlier about the base needs, like if you don't have infrastructure for housing, water, trade and, and whatever, food, like uh, gold is kind of like the last thing that when an empire is building up gold, that generally means that at that point they're taxing people. At that point, there's transactions going on, not just trading thing for thing, you're trading gold for thing. right? So that at that point you can tax that. So that's like a whole different level of society, like when they've gotten to that point. Whereas I think like very early societies don't, gold doesn't do much for them if they can't transact with it. You know what I mean? So I think there's a level of infrastructure needed. I'm not saying that that's not to say like when people were buying slaves, when the Europeans are going to West Africa and buying slaves with, like, what do they buy it with? Sometimes with gold, sometimes, but like more frequently it was what? It was firearms, gunpowder, things that they want, that they need. You know, they're not buying things with gold because there was not the infrastructure to be transacting with gold over there. Gold didn't really do much except for it looked nice and you might be able to get something with gold, maybe. But like, you know what I mean? So that's all I had to say about that.
That is an interesting observation. So, what has happened since 1500? I know we got started on the Renaissance a little bit.
Yeah, so the Renaissance was kind of in the middle of it was going on. I want to skip this commercial revolutions. Like, I mean, it's important, but it's not that.
It's before the 1500s.
Oh yeah, irrelevant. Renaissance. I mean,
Got the telescope, right? Was that Renaissance?
pretty sure that was yeah, wasn't that who created it? Was it Galileo?
Yeah.
Galileo Galilei,
The heliocentric model.
and he got proven wrong. The guy Galileo was definitely incorrect, but he tried his best.
The Leonardo da Vinci?
No, who proved Helios? No, heliocentric is what?
The sun-centered galaxy.
Oh,
Whereas,
I thought Galileo did the opposite. He said it was
yeah.
Earth-centered.
No, I thought Galileo was heliocentric.
Oh, yes, he disproved geocentrism.
Yeah.
So he said, and that's why. Okay, that's why the church got pissed at him because they were like, I think at that point they were very like, no, wait, no, Earth is in the middle, and he was like, no, and then they put him under house arrest.
Yeah, I actually think the church like thought like, yeah, it was geocentric, but more along the lines of yeah, the earth is in the center and the earth is also not a ball and it's flat and the stars are just lights in the sky rather than.
Yeah, and if you like take a boat into the ocean too far, you'll fall.
Yeah, I think that's why they got kind of pissed.
I mean, yeah, they didn't really know what was going on. That's also why like they were like, oh, it's so risky to like go on these like explorations on the ocean because they're like, don't go too far. Be careful. You're gonna fall. Don't go that far.
Yeah, they got that wrong because clearly there's a wall.
Right. No, it was an interesting time, but I would say the most important thing to know about the Renaissance is we have to look at it from, I think it's like a couple main factors. Education. So specifically as it relates to reading and writing. Science, exploration, and what was that last one I was gonna say?
Logic.
Social mobility. I think philosophy too, a little bit had a revamping, but we can call it philosophy. No, I know. Instead of philosophy, let's say artwork. So I'd say, what was it? Science, reading and writing, so learning, exploration, social mobility,
Art.
art. That's what the Renaissance was. So what's the abbreviation for that? Scalabalaba. Anyways, um, so let's kind of dig into art. Obviously, as we know, Da Vinci, one of the biggest ones. Like what is it? Michelangelo, I'm pretty sure was also a Renaissance artist. Like all of these kind of new ways of depicting. I mean, whether it's because the Renaissance was not all like a lot of people think of it as like an abandoning of what used to be kind of like traditional Catholic and Christian values. It wasn't that. It was almost like a revitalizing of it in a different way because up until that point it was a very locked down, like, we have our way of doing things and you can't pursue science or any of these things that disprove what we're saying. Whereas I think what the Renaissance did is it opened the doors to saying you can still pursue science and have this, like, for example, a scientific method. We can create a method to pursue science in a way that proves God's existence instead of denying God's existence, right? So that was kind of like the big thing there. So kind of allowing for science and Christianity specifically, obviously, because that was what was in the region, like to go hand in hand, which was really huge. Um, Exploration, obviously, going to different continents and exploring things and seeing, like, trade routes and looking for, also missionary work also to do that. Social mobility, is the first time that you could have somebody not just be locked in for the most part to what their social class dictated they had to do for a living,
And so that's like kind of an important step towards like capitalism, right?
Yeah, yeah, because feudalism like locked people into one role, and like they could only do what their social standing said they could do. And if with this, it's like you said, one step closer. It's like, okay, like you might not be able to 100% do it, but you can pursue art. You can do arts and sciences. So that's something new that people didn't have available to them before, right? So that's pretty. Yeah, it was a big step towards it. And then what was the other one? It was
Art.
no, I did art. I did art, social mobility, and sciences. We got to think about science.
Well, we did science, right? We did. You're good to pursue science as long as you don't try and disprove God.
Oh yeah, we did do that. What was the other? Oh my gosh.
Oh, education.
Yes, reading and writing. Yes. Printing press became really utilized. People started reading, like especially when it comes to kind of like Protestant works, I think, because that up until that point, reading, specifically in the religious context, was very gate kept to just, the clergy and religious elite. Like it was not anybody can go in and read, like a Bible. Like that just wasn't a thing. If you were to read a Bible, you would go to church and you would have it read to you, and you didn't really understand what they were saying because they were speaking in Latin and no one spoke Latin. So it's like one of those things where at that point, that's when they started kind of, at least on a mass scale, printing Bibles and religious texts in like local languages and translating on a mass scale, like translating from Latin to, or from Greek to, I guess it would be Latin at that point, translating from Latin to, a German, or going to English, or going to French, like doing that was like the first time that was done.
And
So
and so kind of bringing that to today, we could see we're sort of in a renaissance of some sort when you think of all these like technologies, especially the printing press. That's the one like Ray Dalio really emphasizes here, because now you can, record the scientific discoveries you have and then spread it around and educate people and stuff like that. Like we're kind of in a similar point, I feel like a similar period of about to have like exponential growth, or like, I don't know, like another factor of growth on the knowledge uh growth that we have today. And that's like in the AI, in the field of AI, how that, like, I don't know, I feel like that was formerly like the super powerful AI that was formerly like just reserved for I don't know, probably the military and, I don't know, scientific researchers, like super high up scientific researchers, super rich and stuff like that. But now it's kind of being rolled out. And now we have things like Chat GPT 4, where, I don't know, like if some like average Joe kind of like, points Chat GPT 4 at the right problem in the right way, I mean, that can replace like jobs and stuff like that. And it can, I don't know, it's also a powerful tool for spreading information, similar how the printing press did. But AI, it can have a particular agenda behind it, just like the Renaissance. It had the agenda of, yeah, you can pursue these things, as long as it proves God. Now we have the agenda of, yeah, you can pursue these things as long as it proves climate change or some crap like that, you know?
Yeah, it's like democratizing knowledge, but like there's always like a downside to it because I mean, as we're talking about with like how like the Protestants were very like about open communication, all these things, it also turned very quickly to a point where it's like, yeah, well, you can now use the printing press and talk about things as long as it relates to like our version of what we think is right, as opposed, but like don't be Catholic and use it because like we're gonna have a problem. You know, it's like so it turns very quickly, like you said with the climate. It's like it turns very quickly to like, oh, it's a free, democratized way of learning into a if you fit into this category,
Right.
if what you're saying proves what I think is right.
What's kind of interesting is back then, like, you know, that there was that gatekeeping, right? Where, oh, only if you're Protestant can you use these things. And that was enforced in different ways, like probably just manually, you know, humans like own the printing press and they were like, you know, what do you want to print? Stuff like that. But now, so there was a lot of things that could slip through the cracks with that, right? Um, but now you have these AI models with all this bias like built in that you can't really change. And so that's kind of how now the, I don't know, like usage agenda or the gatekeeping is kind of being played out today. So I think there's an interesting little parallel there. Could be that we're on you know, as I said at the beginning, like another Renaissance type transformation. And it probably didn't start at AI, right? The Renaissance was like 300 years, 1300s to the 1600s. This probably started when we created like the radio or whatever,
I
you
mean,
know?
internet renaissance, you know, could be. I mean, yeah, yeah. I would say last thing I did want to say though is another interesting thing that I think is typical of a renaissance is we start to become very like tolerant of other things because I think and to different degrees because obviously in like the European Renaissance I think that one thing that ended up happening because obviously the Ottomans still existed, they were still there, but one thing that happened is there becomes less of a fervor of like because up until that point the Dark Ages Europe was very, I mean, I don't think you could call it, I guess it's not really translatable though, like in terms of like Islamophobia, but they were definitely very anti Middle East for sure. Like for sure. I mean, so the Middle East was very anti Europe too, so it's like it went both ways. But I think they went to the lengths of like on an organized level, the church will not allow for you to deal with these people. Like when it comes to like a transactional thing, like no, people still did. You know, I'm sure you had because if it's one thing that's consistent over time is that business people, merchants do not care what organizations say. They're going to deal with who they deal with because they need to deal with them, you know? So I'm sure it was in their interest to trade with these people and it was fine because as long as they're both making money, they don't care what religion you are. You know, at the end of the day, like, hey, am I making money? Am I getting a good trade here? That's what matters. But on an organizational level, that was a no-no. But I think when the Renaissance happened, when it started going, especially when it was kind of maturing, there was less of that stigma. So there was more of kind of a healthy, at least on a transactional level, a back and forth between Europe and the Middle East for sure. It kind of started to change a little bit because up until that point it was all war, 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 conquer, 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 you know, back and forth. And then it kind of became okay, like we can coexist here. You know, we can trade with each other. We're neighbors. You know, it wasn't friendly. They didn't like each other, but at the end of the day, like, hey, like it becomes it's not really like a what do you call those, like a cannon waiting to fire, like it's like okay, like we're on a good stage right now. So that's another thing. I mean, I think whenever a renaissance period is going down, I think that might be like almost how we're dealing with well, not really, I don't know, I was trying to draw like an analogy like today's world, but like we've gotten to the far extent where we're treating an enemy like a friend. Like we're talking about like China and like we're dealing with them so delicately and kindly, but it's like I don't think you can really translate it to this point because at this point they weren't really like there wasn't that risk of the Ottomans going in and conquering Europe. Like they weren't gonna do that. They couldn't do that. So it's like I was trying to make a comparison, but I guess it doesn't really apply.
One thing that I had on my mind is the Renaissance was also Europe centered, right? So this seems to be like Ray Dalio here is like, I guess for the next couple of sections here is going through what made Europe a little bit more powerful, like how they rose out of being the feudal states or whatever into a little bit more centralized, a little bit more organized uh situation there, right?
Well, one thing that definitely helped them is colonialism. That's for sure.
And that's next. That's the next section. Exploration and colonialism.
Let me tell you, I think everyone felt colonialism to an extent. Colonialism was definitely that is one thing that I think you could say is. I mean, I'm not sure really. I mean, over time, I have with like a 90% level of confidence that that was a uniquely European thing for sure. Because even China, yes, they had the potential and they had the ability to do it, but they never really did. Like they'd never had colonial possessions that were paying tributes to them. Like they never did that. Um, so it was interesting because it's like I think the difference between colonialism and imperialism is like imperialism is when you conquer things pretty much for the sake of conquering them, and then they kind of pay you tributes and stuff. But colonialism is where you go in there and you're using it to draw resources to further expand. So I think that's something that, again, like pretty uniquely European, I would say, and especially when it comes to North America, I think at this point in time, I mean, you could have Africa was, I think Africa and the Americas were the only place that you would be able to do that. Honestly, like at this point, I mean, not saying it was ripe for the taking, but the infrastructure was not there and the technology was not there. So, you know, uh, if North America had guns at this point, very different story. Well, not very different story, but if it would be different, it would be different. But then also like the disease had a big part of it. But yeah, like I mean, the fact that they went there from a perspective of we need wealth, we need resources, and we need to spread Christianity. Those are the three things. And they did get wealth. They did get resources, but most of the people died. So it's like they didn't really spread much Christianity.
Yeah. I mean, North America was a good Christian success story, you know?
Yeah, but like the natives were dead.
But South America is pretty predominantly Christian as well.
They also died. The natives were also gone. Like that's one thing I think I saw recently. That was like in South America, there was a lot. Well, okay, North America, there's a lot less mingling between white settlers and natives. There's a lot in terms of like having children and that being normal. South America, that was very normal. Like, not saying that they would get married and have a happy family, but a lot of the time they would have like a mistress or whatever who's native, and then that's why you have so many mixed people in South America versus in North America, it's a lot less so. Um, but again, that's still to say that like ultimately the native peoples Christianity for at least in North America for native peoples was pretty much. I mean, that was like your one outlet to later on to be able to go to school and stuff like that as a native person. It was pretty much through converting. In South America, it was a lot more forced, but also like if you didn't, like you also probably didn't die. So it's like one of those things where I think that it was kind of again, and maybe it is a difference between kind of Protestant and Catholic, approaches to kind of what they were doing, but ultimately, like I think the end result was the same in that like most of the people died and it became a kind of Christian land, not through conversion, but just through like, and I'm not saying it's like it was the fault of them, like they murdered most of these people, like most of it was disease, obviously, but ultimately it's like, it became that way because the people before were kind of like all gone.
Yeah, and
So
the
it's like they kind of
people
cleared
who
house and then like started new pretty much. So yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. It was interesting time for sure. A lot of people still have a lot to say about it for sure. They're like, "You colonized," and then other people are like, "America, rah, home base advantage, you lost." So it's like it's interesting seeing what people say these days. But at the end of it, what it was is, I mean, undoubtedly, it was a situation where settlers were very, especially in North America, were very, very, very power hungry, for sure. And they were just chomping up land. Like they needed it. Like they would go in, they would build whatever, they would chop down a bunch of trees, they would basically just take over parts of land. I have a book, a really good book up there. It's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It's a book about essentially it's like an anthology of different written recorded events between kind of native tribes and settlers, or at this point it was Americans, but it starts at like the point where they were settlers to when they were like officially almost like Civil War time, like 1800s. And how that kind of line that we won't cross kept kind of getting pushed further and further and further, and how they go, oh, we're not going to go past the Mississippi. And then they're like, oh, but manifest destiny, we have to. We don't have a choice. Like, God told us. And then they're like, but you guys signed this thing saying you're not going to do it. Right. So it's like a whole thing where, I mean, there was one part of the book where I think Wounded Knee itself, maybe I'm wrong, but it was like, there were several instances. One, I think in the Northeast and like New England, where they literally went in and like they burned an entire like village while like I think it's like the men had done a raid the day before or something like that, and they like none of them were there. It was all women and children, so they like all burned the outside so no one could leave, and like everyone died.
Yeah, colonialism, like looking back, wasn't that great. Like it definitely was pretty savage in a lot of ways, and as uh, I but no one could really argue that like colonialism was one of the biggest influences, or no one can argue that colonialism wasn't one of the biggest influences that led to kind of the Western dominated global world order that we have today.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, also we wouldn't have America, like the United States, without it. So I mean, like it was a necessary evil, and ultimately, like when you look at it, I was having this conversation with my mom the other day, but it's like if we never did do that sort of savage kind of lying approach to how we dealt with the stuff like the natives here and kind of taking over this land and everything like that, then like would we have even anything close to the same thing, like in terms of a country? Like no, not even close, not even close. And if we never came here at all, would was that the natural progression for the Native Americans to build it up to what we have now? No, I don't think so either, because they didn't have contact with anybody else. So ultimately, like it would have maybe eventually they could have figured it out, but that would have taken freaking so much, that would generations longer. Like it would have been so much longer. So at the end of the day, it's like it was a necessary evil, but ultimately, like, what would the world be like if that didn't happen? I wonder.
It would look way different. Um, was so? This is just a quick question. Colonialism. That's when the British also went over to China and got everyone addicted to opium and like took all their stuff, right?
I forgot what that was. I completely forgot about that. It was called like the Opium War or something like that.
Yeah, like everyone
Yeah,
kept buying drugs because they were so addicted
because they were
to it.
trading the Chinese, yeah, drugs. And then they went to war, and then they destroyed the Chinese. But at this point, the Chinese were like they were pretty weak at 1840. Hold on, Chinese.
But what does that parallel today, right? China, Mexico, border, United States, fentanyl. We got modern day opium wars. That's another parallel.
No, why don't we fight Mexico?
Huh?
Why don't we fight Mexico then?
Mexico is just an instrument. Mexico's a pawn.
I don't think so, because Mexico and China are not hand in hand. Mexico is taking manufacturing from China. And China's been really pissed off about that, because Mexico keeps taking like more and more and more manufacturing things from China and just taking it in Mexico. They're taking a lot of their business. So China's getting a little angry, especially given all the shit that happened recently with their investments. Like China needs money. And right now, Mexico is taking a lot more of the money that they would be making. So China's a little angry.
Well, somehow that Chinese fentanyl is coming through that southern border. I don't know how you would
That might be a thing with now, because I don't think that's a. At the end of the day, the Mexican government struggled with the cartel for like a long time. They have zero control over that. They're useless when it comes to controlling the cartels. If anything, it's dealing between the cartel and China, which is a separate thing.
So the cartels are pawns.
Well, the cartels are. I don't know if I would call them. They're doing real well for themselves. I don't know if they're pawns of anything. At the end of the day, I think that it's financially, they're incentivized to do that. Cartels are rich as hell as it is. They have so much money. So at the end of the day, it's like, why would it hurt for them to just sell one more product that the Chinese are just selling them? Like, why would that hurt them? It wouldn't. It's not that they would not do fine without it.
Why would it
More
hurt
money.
the British to sell more opium to the Chinese? It wouldn't.
They don't need it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's the same situation.
Do I think that? I don't know. I just don't think that it's I don't know.
There's a lot of people who say a lot of the homelessness in the United States, which is becoming a huge issue, no doubt, is a result of a lot of drugs, a lot of drug use, and that like if our nation wasn't being infiltrated by fentanyl, then maybe there wouldn't be so many homeless people.
Maybe, but at the end of the day, like our unemployment's pretty low right now. So it's like I hate to sound savage, but like who cares about homeless people if our unemployment's low?
Well,
Unless you live in like San Francisco, then like yeah, that sucks. Like, but like sucks to suck. That's because your city government's ass. That's because California's ass.
unemployment only counts the people who don't have a job and are looking for a job. It's not just people who don't have jobs.
Well, do
so
you not
those
think it's-
homeless people, because they're doing drugs, they're not looking for a job. They're just out on the street doing drugs.
Do you not think it's an exposure like sort of bias too, because you see it? So because you see it, you think it's more prevalent than it is?
How about this? I'm going to do a shameless Substack plug right here. But on Substack, to do some statistics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some data visualization and get back to you like a good consultant on
Circle back.
on the homeless problem in the United States. How about that?
All right.
We could talk next week on the opium wars and its parallels to our fentanyl crisis today.
Okay. Let's do it. But beyond that, colonialism. Here's the deal about colonialism. Well, kind of want to skip by that.
I think we covered colonialism.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. Let's see. Oh,
we got the Reformation.
yeah, Protestant Reformation. That was very important. Only made the printing press more prevalent. Pretty important. It was very important. at the end of the day. And it was more than just a religious reformation. It changed everything at the end of the day. Like that's also what pushed. Um, when we think about like the, I'm echoing a little bit. Oh. No, it also is it changed even when you think about like the Protestant work ethic, sort of that word. What it started from is like a kind of the tenacity to start and build something, from the ground up, which is something that I think, it translated from, feudalism where you're kind of designated a job to then this sort of push to Protestantism, which is kind of like you kind of shape your own destiny to an extent. Like you're shaping what your life is. You're going to be able to build from the bottom up, which then I think transitioned into Adam Smith capitalism, right? So I think it's like it was kind of a natural stepping stone into what would then become capitalism. So I think capitalism by nature, not fully, but it has some roots within Protestantism, you know. Um, and the I knew about the whole piece about indulgences. Basically it's like,
Heresy.
yeah, it's like give me money and we'll less time in purgatory.
Yeah, you know why that's heresy, right? Because the whole thing about Christianity is Jesus pays for your sins, and that you can't do anything except put your faith in Jesus to pay for your sins and not go to hell or purgatory or whatever you want to call it. And so that just grinds my gears, indulgences. You know what I mean? Because it's like the concept of, oh yeah, you can work your job and earn enough money and give it enough to the Catholic Church to pay for your sins and not go to hell for whatever amount of time. It's like Jesus' sacrifice wasn't enough. Then that nullifies Jesus' sacrifice. That literally according to the Bible. Like if you can fulfill the law, then Jesus' sacrifice means nothing. Literally, Book of Romans.
Yeah, but I think Catholicism is different because I mean just the way that they did everything with um like confessions and things of that sort. Like it's like you can't go to heaven. You have to be free from the marks of sin. So it's like the way that they see it, I'm pretty sure is um like even if you're in like God's good graces, but you're like like imperfect in that sense, then like you have to go through that kind of cleansing of purgatory. And then you go to heaven. So it's not like you're going to hell. You're going to be cleansed of that remaining, and then you're going to heaven after that.
Yeah, the Catholics made that up because it's not in the Bible.
Well, I mean, like, sure, like Catholics have something to say.
Yeah, put it in the comments below if you are a Catholic and you have something to say.
But still interesting from just a, it's still the Reformation is really huge from a uh, just from a population standpoint. A lot of people, specifically in more Anglo and Anglo-Saxon sort of cultures, pivoted to that. They were kind of drawn to that a lot more than like Latin peoples were, like the Spanish and the French and the Italians and stuff like that. They were not drawn to that as much, but people like the Germans and the English definitely were. So interesting to see like what types of people were more drawn to that versus others, and why? Because generally those societies were a lot more not free, but I would say like class fluid, I guess, question mark. I guess that would be a way to say it, versus like the French and Spanish who are a lot more like social hierarchy based. I don't know. It's interesting. It's almost like comparing the caste system in India to like what parts of India were like when Islam came and got rid of caste system. It's sort of similar because it's like it's two different things. It's like apples to oranges, and like some people preferred one and some people preferred the other. I don't know. Weird. Um, but that kind of pivots us to 30 Years' War. Protestant versus Catholic is the highlight. A lot of people died in Germany. Then it became capitalism. Woohoo! Karl Marx.
That's not capitalism.
Karl Marx.
That's Marxism.
I know. Karl Marx. Anyways, yeah, Adam Smith.
Yeah.
Adam Smith was good. That's Amsterdam Stock Exchange, first publicly traded system ever in the world. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, 1602,
How many,
selling equities.
how many equities were listed on that exchange? We're gonna tap away, find out. But I just want to throw out there, like, this is, so we started in 1500, we're now in the 1600s. That's how much the world changed over the last 100 years. No shade to the guy I was working out with the other day, but I was working out with a guy the other day, and he was like, yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like my life in 50 years, when I'm kind of growing up out of college, etc., or late into my career, my day-to-day life is going to be the same. And I think this section is illustrating just how quickly things change, all over the world. Like, right now, we're kind of diving deep into Europe, but like, things are changing quickly in Europe. They have always changed quickly in Europe. They've always changed quickly everywhere. And these long-term trends, like, yeah, they happen over 100, 150 years, but they all are kind of offset in the different regions of the world. So it's foolish to think your life isn't going to change in the day-to-day based on what we're reading today. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Fair statement. I mean, like, yeah, it is kind of foolish, honestly. Oh, you can't think that.
But did you find the answer? Stock exchange?
Didn't say how many. Just says that's just when equities began trading on a regular basis as a secondary market traded shares, and it says the Sephardic Jewish writer, or Sephardic Jewish writer,
I like Jews.
Joseph de la Vega.
That's a good name.
Yep.
Strong.
Because the Sephardic Jews were the ones in Spain. When the diaspora happened, they went to Spain. They're Sephardic Jews, as opposed to Ashkenazi Jews who were like Eastern. It was like Spain were Sephardic. They're still Jewish. Anyways, his Confusion of Confusions, this is the name of his book, Confusion of Confusions, is the first full-length work about the stock exchange, its participants, and shareholders. And it existed primarily for the exchange of commodities. So, point is, that was a long time ago, and the fact that that system, we're still trading publicly stocks now, based on what they did back then, is quite interesting. And it was shortly after. Oh, this I did know. It was after, I knew it from my my Random Walk Down Wall Street book, but it's after the establishment. It was right after the establishment of the Dutch East India Company.
T.
Mm-hmm. So the Dutch East India Company brought, you basically were buying shares of basically of that company. They were saying, oh, we're out in India, we're making so much money. Like, here, go ahead and put in money now. Like, you give me money, we're gonna give you like returns based on what we get in India. And people were buying. I mean, a lot of it was like, it was futures. I mean, that's what you're doing. And the same thing happened when the English went over there. You're buying futures. You're saying, hey, like, I'm putting money down now for the potential of me getting a profit in the future. So it was a very interesting time, because I think that was something that up until that point was very foreign, and they made a lot of money, but it also kind of opened the doors to snake oil salesmen and things like that were like basically saying, oh, I'm going to go make this, and then you're going to make so much money. And it kind of opened the doors for a lot of people to be drawn into shams. So shams.
Yeah. I agree. Is a sham a scam?
Let's see.
Well, we got a click-clack away. I also want to go back to the point I was making about our day-to-day life not changing over the course of 50 years. This was back when ships just became a thing. Now that technology has progressed so far and is accelerating even quicker. We know it's an exponential curve. Bro, our day-to-day life isn't going to be the same. Like in the matter, like soon our day-to-day life is going to change in a matter of like months rather than years, you know?
As long as the internet's around and we have access to the things that we need, and we don't go into another dark age.
And even then, that's another crazy day-to-day life change right there.
Dark age? Oh, I mean, yeah, we're hunting. That's pretty different.
Yeah, we'll be there for a while.
Yep, we're gonna be hunting and trapping and doing all that kind of thing. But like not trapping like y'all Atlanta folks. We're not doing that. We're not drug dealing. We're trapping like trapping animals.
I mean, some people might be drug dealing.
I don't know who's got the money for drugs that time.
You might have the food for drugs.
That's true. Bartering for drugs. Imagine. Anyways, a sham is something fake or false. Also the North American name for a certain kind of pillow covering. A scam is a scheme to take advantage of someone. So maybe it's more of it's kind of a sham and a scam.
A shammy scam.
Scammy sham. Anyways, all right. So let's kind of bust through the rest of this. We don't got that much left. High level. Scientific. We already kind of touched on a lot of these things. Scientific revolution. Talked about that. Scientific method was the thing that kind of kicked that off. Pairing religion with science hand in hand, helping, well, just allowing for people. It was kind of like a big push for free thought, free research and having people be able to question and identify flaws within current understandings of how the world works.
Basically the Renaissance.
What it is. Copernicus, Galileo, to be, Galileo with the disproving the geocentric method, and then Copernicus, who I think changed the way that I think he changed something that Galileo said, but kind of led to the Enlightenment. Then we have the Industrial Revolution, the first one in the UK. Definitely not a period of time that you wanted to live through in the UK. Wasn't very fun. That's like when you would, Jimmy would go to the coal mine. Your little boy is 10 years old, and you would come back and you would have black lung, and Jimmy's dead in a week.
And you get the plague.
Yep.
Is that the plague around that?
I mean, well,
1800s?
Black plague or what plague?
Maybe one of the plagues.
1300s. Okay, plagues from 1300s. The first wave was the Black Plague. Bubonic plague. When was the 14th century? It's not that. Third plague. 1855.
Okay, so we had the third plague.
It was after the Industrial Revolution, though.
So you get black lung, and then you get killed by the plague.
Right. It wasn't a fun time. It's like, like your kids were, covered in soot all the time. Like you always see the pictures of them and they're just like, oh, Jimbo. And Jimbo's like black, but he's a white kid. So it was definitely not a great time to be around. You think about these cities, there's not sewage like that. So people are still kind of dumping shit off the side of their door. But like there's like millions of people living there now, and they're living in like little tiny, like I think they call them tenements or something like that, and they're like little, almost like an apartment, but like it's like a little box, and like everyone's just sleeping on the floor, packed in like sardines. Like that's crazy. That's a crazy way to live. Definitely depressing. And infant mortality was very high, so a lot of babies dying, a lot of kids dying, kids not making it to like adulthood. You putting your kids to work, they're either sewing or they're in the mines, which I think, listen, hot take, Minecraft is a way to all the kids playing Minecraft. I think it's a yearning for the mines.
I agree.
The children yearn for the mines. That's all I have to say about it. And
want to just mine things to craft with and craft things to mine with. Simple as that.
I think that if we get to that point again, I think it's time for us to go ahead and put them back.
Yeah.
I think they know how. Now, unfortunately, you can't craft a diamond pickaxe, but they're gonna have to learn how to deal with a regular one, steel pickaxe. But anyways, yeah, definitely not a great time. But from a big picture perspective, they needed it. It needed to happen in terms of like how to actually create cities and industrialize and be, have the output. I mean, especially for a country like England, with how small it is, for them to kind of generate that level of industrial output is like quite incredible, honestly. Very amazing that they're able to do that. Um, and to do that on a level higher than their other European counterparts for an island nation, like that is super impressive. That is super impressive. Um, so government expansion, sanitation, education, housing, infrastructure, courts, central banks. So with great increasing size comes increasing government responsibility.
And so I suppose this is also when cities sort of started taking off. It's like the whole reason you had a city is because you had these giant industrial factories.
Yeah, but London and stuff were cities for a long time up until that point. They just weren't industrial cities like capitals. They were just commerce capitals.
So like merchants would come from
Yeah.
far off lands and bring their goods.
Yeah, because London's right there on the I forget what the river that is, but it's a perfect place to have merchants kind of come in and they stop and there you are. You're right there. Cities were always like kind of strategically. I mean, it was just a gathering spot, right? So it's like cities like what is that city in Lebanon? Beirut, Lebanon. Like that was like back when the Phoenicians were around. That was a huge city because what is it? It's right there on the Mediterranean. So everyone's crossing by there needing to, they stop their ships. They need to feed their crews or whatever. And you're right there. What is that going to be? It's a trading spot.
The city that has been inhabited the longest
All time?
all time.
Damascus?
Yep.
I know it.
I know you know it.
Big
You
point.
just proved it.
No, Damascus has been around for like forever, dude. There's so much history in Damascus. That's an old place for sure. I think I was talking to an Uber driver who was Syrian, and we were talking about it on the way back. It's like a couple weeks ago, but I was like, man, like there's a lot of history there. He was like, for sure. He said, like, I mean, it's unfortunate all like the war and the bombing has done to like destroy a lot of that history, but like at the end of the day, like you see some of the architecture there, and you're like, that you don't find that sort of old in Alpharetta. I'll tell you that. That's like old. Like that is older than like, I mean, that's BC's old.
That's older than steel. No, it isn't.
Oh, it's older than America for sure. Rah, home base advantage. You still lost. Anyway.
All right, so that was the first industrial revolution. We got anything we left out there?
No.
1700s to the 1800s. Black lung.
Yeah.
Pretty
Jimmy's dead at 7 years old. Yeah. Tough time.
So now, for some reason, we're going back in time to the 1600s and 1700s. Ray Dalio's writing style really kind of confuses me sometimes.
Hey, let's skip that. That one doesn't really. No, we're good without that.
I feel like that's Renaissance Part 3.
Yeah, I don't need it. Yeah, I'd say really it's just second industrial revolution. It's pretty much U.S. That's all it is. That's all you gotta know.
Trains.
Huh?
Trains.
Yep. Trains, railroads leads to I mean, when we think about it, it was right before and then right after the Civil War, right? Because they had Reconstruction, rebuilding all the railroads and stuff in the South, reconnecting everything. That was that, and then building also more factories in the South, whereas before South was very like an agricultural hub. And then became more of like a little bit more, manufacturing in the South as well, and then leading to the Gilded Age in the 1910s, which then led to the 1920 or sorry, Gilded Age was early 1900s, then World War One, then 1920s, the Roaring Twenties. then depression, and then wow.
Well, second industrial revolution, I think one thing we got to.
You're muted.
Oh, we can't overlook the increase in travel and the increase in communication. So, right, we got the trains. The trains led to the cars. And then we also have electricity and telephones. So, remember back in the 1500s, the world was huge, according to Ray Dalio. Now, all of a sudden, within 50 years, the world just shrunk. Because now after you lay the lines down, you can call anyone you want, at least in your country, right? You don't have to travel 150 miles by foot to go deliver a letter and then wait 6 more months to get a response. It's just like you call, and that sped things up a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Got Alexander Graham Bell to thank for that. But I think one of the last things here is communism. It was by that was Karl Marx. And he was just anti-capitalism pretty much, just like the opposite of it. And neither Adam Smith nor Karl Marx were really stand out guys. Both kind of crappy in their own way. I'm pretty sure Karl Marx was he Jewish? I think he was. I'm pretty confident. I think Marxism. I think he was.
We got capitalism invented in the 1600s.
Oh. Marx was Jewish parents, but he was a Christian and an atheist and an anti-Semite.
I feel like those are all.
Well, no. So he was baptized at 6 years old, but then he became kind of transitioned into being atheist.
Okay.
And then, but I got actually confused. He wasn't Jewish. He actually did not like Jewish people.
But his parents were Jewish, so he was Jewish.
By technically, yes. Well, yeah. Like if you ask any Jewish person, if your parents are Jewish, are you Jewish? Yes.
You could hate Jews and still be Jews.
Yeah, I think he just had an identity crisis. Anyways.
Yeah, you kind of have to have an identity crisis to invent communism,
Something's wrong. But hey, ultimately he had, I think at the base of it, his ideas were pretty much, you look at it almost like from a scientific standpoint. It wasn't like, it was like hey, I'm taking what Smith said and I'm saying, here are what I identify as the faults in what you said. Here's what I think is right. They're both, ultimately, I don't think Adam Smith's idea of his idea either was to change how societies adapt their financial systems. I think it was almost like a philosophical, like an essay of sorts, like a research article. Like, this is what I think, this system I think would work because of this, and then Marx basically said, no, I don't think that would work. Here's what I think would work, and here's why I think why. But then people are like, they adopt it, and then they just, I think it's similar to almost like religion, where you have the writing, and then you take it, when you try to implement it on a grand level like that, there are things that, whether knowingly or unknowingly, that you're going to change because of the reality of what your current situation is. So you're going to say, oh, well, like, yeah, this one piece about like the free, like, healthcare is really great, but like, we can't do that. So we're going to say no to that. You know what I mean? So like, that's just an example, but I think that that's kind of what happened, and they both kind of ended up being, I think, just as communism is like impossible to implement in a positive way, I think that like capitalism definitely has its downsides as well, for sure.
I agree, and I think people have realized that. And one thing I'd like to point out is capitalism was just started in the 1600, right? 1600.
Yeah.
Communism came out 1850. I guess 250 years later, and now we're at year 2000. So we're 150 years after that. It seems like we're kind of due for a economic system revamp. And I think with the rise of like autonomous, systems like AI and stuff, we're kind of looking at like this weird, like universal basic income thing. Like that's been talk of the town.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It like I just see that the time differential there. Obviously, we have 2 data points, but we know things are speeding up because of technology, right?
I mean, for sure, but I think ultimately, like, we've already kind of adapted our system, like, over time. We've kind of, like, we have a mixed economy as it is. So we already take components of both and say, okay, like, on a grand scale, if we're closer to one than the other, we're definitely closer to capitalism. But there's definitely, like, when we're talking about pure capitalism, we're talking about, like, laissez-faire, like, no government intervention, hands off, free market controls everything. That's what Adam Smith was talking about. We cannot do that because when you do that, you end up in situations like we were talking about poor Jimmy with Black Lung. Like they don't give a damn about the people working in these environments. Like they're trying to make money, and that's it. Like little Jimmy's gonna work the mine. He's 7 years old, and if he dies of black lung, sorry, hey, we're gonna give you 10 nickels. Sorry, he died. Give us your other son. You know what I mean? So it's like at the end of the day, like we've already adapted and created a different, such like a hybrid system right now as it is. So I think, I mean, 100% I'm down. Like I agree that like there is a revamp needed, but ultimately like we've already kind of adapted.
Yeah, I agree.
For
And
sure.
I think looking back, right? Like especially with capitalism, like Ray Dalio says, yeah, it just happened in the 1600s. Like Adam Smith, I guess, wrote it down, like you said, but I don't know if there was like a specific year we could say, oh yeah, we went from just trading and making goods and services in 1599 to all of a sudden now we're doing it in a capitalist way. Like I think you always have to look at it like with a historical lens to kind of see, okay, well maybe this book kind of marks when people just started changing their thoughts about what they've had been doing for 50 years or whatever. And so, I mean, coming back to now, it's like we're in this hybrid model. So maybe it'll take the rise of AI and for 50% of the jobs to be replaced and a book to be written to be like, okay, well, now we're in a, techno capital commune economy, like I don't really know what the name is gonna be.
Sounds like a music genre, dude.
So I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts on it. Like it's hard to know the exact transition point, but I do agree with you. It's a slow transition. I think it always is. And but like there is gonna be a point where I guess we're in the future and it's like, okay, looking back, here's the transition point. But the challenge always is like identifying that transition point right now. And I think if you can, that's how you kind of make money, or that's how you can make money. That's how you invest wisely.
Well, let me ask you this: since we've just wrapped up, and we're next chapter, FYI, is a big cycle rise and decline of the Dutch Empire and the Guilder. So more history next, and a little bit of a Substack. But here's the thing: what do you think are some closing ideas you have about learning? Well, we're talking about this history and how it applies to now. What are your some general thoughts you have?
General thoughts. I would say, it's clear that, Europe, I would say, and Africa in the 1500s were about, I don't know, probably on par actually, right? Because we had that big Mansa Musa empire that sort of fell into a tribal feudal state, maybe that similar to where Europe was. And then Europe kind of made this giant comeback and start colonizing everywhere and taking everyone down. And it like what we think of today as the world order is very Western centered, and so I think it just goes to show like really how unpredictable things can be, but at the same time how quickly things can change.
Well, what I find interesting is that like you said, like it's very Western centered, but this is the first time that the world has been at that Western centered point since Rome. So it's like, and that was a long time ago. So it was a long time when there was no Western influence to anything, no Western contribution to anything. So I think that the most important or relevant thing for me is just thinking like, hey, for consistency's sake, when we look at over time, what regions have always remained influential and embedded within their own history? Because even Europe, when we look at modern day Europe versus in the past, yes, they still align with like their history, but not really. Not to like the extent that I would say the Chinese do. Because their history just simply is not as long. Like you think the English are, thinking of their history all the way back to like the Gaelic, or whatever, like the whatever native people were over there. No, they don't. Like their history begins after the Romans left England and they became their own area. That's when their history starts. For China, it started 2,000 years before Christ, right? So it's like that's a long time. So at the end of the day, and they've remained. I mean, obviously the language has adapted a little bit, but even the language is pretty consistently the same. They have the same characters. They can still go back and read Chinese from hundreds of years ago. It's the same thing, right? So it's like I think that from a like that's one of the only places in the world that you can see like this place has remained not unchanged, but they have remained consistent with their level of sphere of influence, with their power, with their science, with their technology, with their innovation, like art, everything. Like they have always been a center of knowledge and like of just a powerhouse, So I think it's like not. I think if anything, you can even relate. Although it's communist China now, you could even call it like I bet down the road, when history 100, let's say it's 300 years from now, they're gonna call it like the Shi dynasty. Like this was their period for this, whatever how many years after the Mao dynasty that they became, this, and they had this kind of system of government. But it's just another ebb in like the pool of China over time. It's still gonna stay China. It's still might just change the way that they operate things, but at the end of the day, it's the same old thing. Can we say that same thing about America? Not yet, at least. We haven't had that history yet. We haven't collapsed and then came out of a collapsing, we haven't done that. So you can't really stand the sands of time if you haven't fallen before. So I think it's imminent. It's going to happen. It's just how you get back up from after that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. China's got some endurance. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Like you said, they ebbed and they flowed.
No doubt about that. They did both.
4,000 years of
Ebbing, flowing. A
ebbing
lot of
and
people,
flowing.
a lot of people died too. And a lot of these collapses in their history, a lot of people died. Like I think at one point it was like one of their biggest. I forgot. Let me find it actually. Biggest population decline. Chinese history. I think it was like the Great Famine. That killed. Well, that was 1959 to 61, but that was
How many millions?
14 million people.
Wow. So didn't kill their 17.5 million person army though.
No, no, no. I want to see like biggest Chinese. I want because there was a dynasty. I forget which one it was, but a lot of. Okay, 1850 to 1873, Taiping Rebellion, drought and famine, population of China dropped by over 30 million.
Yeah, that took out the army.
That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Anyways, but my point is that that's 2 instances of a whole lot of people dying. And that's just 2. So at the end of the day, like that's kind of the downside also of being in those long-lasting civilizations. You go through really rough periods, and a lot of people will die. But it's like, and who knows? God knows when the Mongols conquered them, how many people died. So it's like, but at the end of the day, they've standed as a civilization. They have standed the test of time for sure. China has,
And they're still a force to be reckoned with today, for sure.
without a doubt. I mean, China's no joke. China's no joke. So I don't know. That's just kind of what I wanted to highlight, and ultimately, like I hope I'm sure there's a lot to learn with these history lessons, but I think the point of these next few chapters is to just illustrate, like, hey, how do these, like it says, why nations succeed and fail? And I think that's what we're looking at right now. Why they're failing.
One thing I'm looking forward to with the Dutch and the British and the American
Mhm.
is all those nations, all those empires, I suppose, were the global reserve currency. And there's been this term de-dollarization thrown around. Who knows what it means? Who knows if it's real or fake news or not? But it definitely relates to our global reserve currency status and the petrodollar and the gold standard. I think it'll be interesting to see how these empires, like especially the Dutch and the British, went from having control over the global reserve currency and then not.
I wonder, like, 'cause what about places like China that, like, I mean, from a global perspective, no, they weren't like the global currency, but they've just remained so strong. Like, I wonder why that's the case. I'm sure it's because they have local control, but not global, and they've done just fine. You know?
I hope that question is answered. I imagine it will be, because one of the empires we're going to go through is the Chinese. We're going to Dutch, British, American, Chinese. And then maybe we're looking into the future? Question mark.
I think so. Yeah, the future. That's what it
But
says.
I think Ray Dalio will hopefully answer the question, why did the Chinese never get the global reserve currency status? And that is a good question. And I think it's a relevant question because of BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, creating their own like financial institutions involving Saudi Arabia. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I heard about that recently.
That's pretty powerful because Saudi Arabia definitely produces a lot of oil, and energy is pretty powerful in the economy. That's like the thing that drives the economy right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Be interesting to see what happens there. But ultimately, thanks for listening.
This is Two Guys, One Book.
And next episode, we're doing more history and more fun times. Ray Dalio, answer my question. Anyways.
I recommend you listen to Ray Dalio on YouTube because he has a really cool voice.
Does he sound like Robert Kennedy? When I was a kid, my father.
Yeah, he kind of sounds like that.
All right, I'm in. All right, guys. Well, the frog started growing penises, and it was just. Well, we'll see y'all next time for some more history lessons. Signing out.
Bye.